This is continuing our morning group in New York on the subject of treatment. And it is Reel 2 of the New York Practitioner class. Now, this is the point that I wish to make that simplifies healing work if you catch it. But it is the one point on which, I suppose 99% of us fall down. And it is the one point that is never covered in any metaphysical teaching. Not Christian Science, not Unity, not New Thought. It is not covered any place. It is something that I call the middle path. Actually, this constitutes the basis of healing work as I understand it. But it requires the development of something that makes the middle path possible, the development of some inner sense that catches what I'm about to say. We have a patient called John Jones. And John Jones asks for help because he's ill. Right there you have a human being at the moment ill, but nevertheless a human being aging. I don't care if he's only 16 years of age, he's aging, moving on toward those years that we call adulthood and middle years and old age and finally death. That's the picture that is presented to you. In your metaphysical practice, the idea is to take John Jones and make him well. So that if John Jones says, I have 104 fever, and calls up an hour later and says, I have 102 fever, you breathe a sigh of relief and isn't that fine? And now if an hour later he calls and says, it's 99 and 2/5. That's perfect. So it is, the next one calls and says, I have burnt myself and it pains, and then the next hour there isn't even a scar where it was. And again comes that sigh of relief. Isn't that wonderful? Why? We had a sick human being, now we have a well human being. Or the call comes and John Jones is dying, and there's no hope. The doctor says he'll be gone in 3 hours, but you are called, and 3 hours later we hear that John Jones is sitting up and having orange juice. Isn't that wonderful? All based on the fact that John Jones was dying, but now he's alive. Matter of fact, he may be so alive that he goes to work tomorrow and gets run over by a trolley car. I have had 2 experiences in the recent years of this, which I have told classes. One was a man dying of heart disease after years of being under doctor's care and finally being told that this is the last week, this is the last attack, there is no further hope, it's too far gone. And at that stage his wife, who was a student, said, why don't you let Joel take over? Well, he says, in the face of that verdict, why not? I certainly don't want to die, and these fellows hold out no hope. Call Joel. 5 weeks later, the same doctor took a cardiograph and found not one single scar on his heart, not one trace of heart disease, and never again did he have one single murmur from the heart. But this man decided, now I'm so well, watch me make money now. And 2 years later he had made a lot of money in the next 2 years, but he committed suicide. Life had become entirely unendurable to him. Now, his heart wasn't bothering him, but something else was. In other words, that healing had not brought spiritual regeneration to the man. It had brought no desire for God. It was nothing more than a sick man made well, and it hadn't added any desire for life to him or given him anything, since we all know that outer success or money can only be a transitional happiness unless we find it incidental to something far greater than itself. I had another case of a man dying of leukemia, and this man was in a hospital. One of our students met his wife on the street one day. They were very good friends. And the wife says, "Well, I've just come from the hospital, and they say my husband will pass tonight." And she told him how few corpuscles there were left. I don't know whether they were white or red or blue. May have been a blue blood. But anyhow, there were this few corpuscles, and there should have been this many. And this man said to the wife, "Wouldn't you like spiritual help for your husband?" "No, we don't believe in that." "Well, don't you think he might like it?" "No, he doesn't believe it." "Well, would you speak to him about it?" "Oh, yes, I'm going back to the hospital, and I certainly will speak to him, and I'll phone you." And she phoned him and he said, "No, he doesn't believe in that nonsense." Well, this man came to me troubled. He liked this man. They were friends. And said, "Do we have to accept that verdict?" And aren't you forgetting the teaching of the infinite way? What verdict? What man? What have we got to do with a sick man? Are we in the business of healing sick people? Do we much care whether they're sick or well? Why should we? It's their demonstration. We have nothing to do with being doctors. We have nothing to do with prolonging people's lives. Our work is the realization of God as individual identity. Now, is God any less this man's identity, whether he is, to our sense, living or dead or sick or well? No. You sure of that? Oh, no, God is his identity. Well, what do you want God to be? Well, let's leave that alone. And Saturday, that man was released from the hospital, completely healed. A miracle had taken place that the doctor said they had never seen, but which they also said certainly sometimes happens. We don't know how or why, but it happens. So when this man came out of the hospital, our friend went to him and told him about this experience. "Oh, nonsense. Doctor says those things happen once in a while." So he went to his wife and told her that inasmuch as they had never had a home up till then, and he had had this second chance given to him, he thought he would give her a home, and he was going to build a nice one for her. And he did. He began building a home immediately, and when they got up to the roof, he was standing up there one day and fell off and was killed. Now, there again, there was no spiritual regeneration. There was no turning from matter to the other. Evidently, in both these cases, these men had come to the end of their span for one reason or another, and there's nothing we could do to prolong it. They themselves were determining their own experience, but that has nothing to do with us. Here is the point that has to do with us. Are we interested in whether a person's tombstone says 1953 or 1955? Is it important what date is on that tombstone except for some human reason? Is not our work the realization of Christ as individual life, never born and never dying? Isn't that our vision, that whether we see a room full of well people or sick people, Christ is their true identity? The sickness or the wellness depends on our recognition of it and ultimately on theirs. Both of these men had the opportunity, had they been prepared for it, for some kind of a spiritual awakening to their true identity that may have changed the course of this human span. But one thing is certain: we have demonstrated that alive or dead, Christ is their true identity, even if they couldn't accept it. Now, I call this the middle path, And it is for this reason. John Jones now asks for help on the telephone or in a letter or in person. And what happens to us as practitioner in that moment when John Jones turns to us for help? There is the secret of the healing work. Are we going to try to improve John Jones, or are we going to sit there in the realization of Christhood? That is the point. The moment you enter into a human sympathy with John Jones, the moment you enter into a desire to heal him or improve him or reform him or correct him, you are on the basis of human regeneration, and when you're through, you'll still have a human being. Now, that is not our function. We are not psychologists. We are not psychiatrists. And above all, we are not medical doctors. That is not our function. Our function is a revelation of God as individual you and me. Our function is the realization of our Christhood. Now, I don't care whether it is the thief on the cross. Please remember, the Christhood is the same. That is why the Master could take him into paradise tonight. He had no period to go through of reform or regeneration or punishment, and he had no karma to work out. If your sins are scarlet, ye are white as snow. When? When you turn for the recognition of your Christhood. Oh, you say, but I sin again tomorrow. That has nothing to do with it. You may sin tomorrow and the day after and next week too. That is no more important than if your pain lasts today, tomorrow, next week, and next year. Not at all. What counts is that you have turned to the realization of your Christhood. Now, if you turn to one who can bring it forth into manifestation, it will come. Whether it comes instantaneously, as in those cases, or whether, as in some of our other cases, it is a slow process of moving out of material consciousness into spiritual consciousness, makes no difference. You can see where it might have been far better had these two not had instantaneous healings and been compelled to dig in and desire life and work at it until they come to their realization that to have had an instantaneous healing that, so far as they were concerned, was just physical disease becoming physical health. Most of you here know the story of my very good friend and very long-time friend, Kate Buck. It is a matter of more than 60 years ago when Kate Buck was given up to die. Materia Medica had no hope for her at all. And in those days, surgery was a very risky thing, and she was advised not to try it. And so, in that condition, Kate Buck turned to Christian Science, which was a very young thing at the time. And Kate Buck had a very prosperous husband, so that she could afford the best practitioners and the best teachers in Boston, and she had them. But for 9 years she lived on without a healing. She lived on always just in the verge of dying or getting a little better or sinking back. But she did hang on for 9 years. But in this 9th year period, it was very evident that she couldn't hold on much longer. She was going. And at that point, Kate says to herself, it can't be helped. I'm going. I might as well stop trying to be healed. I've done everything I can, so have these good practitioners and teachers. I think I'll spend my last weeks just trying to find out about God, so that when I make the transition, at least I'll be a little closer to an understanding. And the moment she gave up trying to be healed and looked for God, she was healed. And Kate Buck remained with us until she was 96 years of age. And for more than 50 of those years, she was one of the finest Christian Science practitioners in the entire movement. Did wonderful, wonderful healing work. But she had learned, you see, that you cannot heal physical disease. That isn't the function of real, true, spiritual Christian Science any more than it is the function of the infinite way. As we give up our nets, not seek to have our nets filled with more fishing. That really seems to exemplify the whole thing. That most of us are praying to God and turning to the Christ to have our nets made full of fish where they seem to be empty, instead of the Master's teaching of leave your nets. Leave your father. Don't go seeking companionship. Leave your companionship. Seek my companionship and see what happens. Ah, there we have it. We have a new dimension, another plane of consciousness in which we do not seek the human good. We do not seek human companionship. We do not seek human supply. We do not seek human anything, but rather we seek to leave those, to forsake them. Mother, father, sister, and brother, for my sake. And then what happens? We gain the spiritual sense of parenthood, childhood, husbandhood, wifehood. So it is with health. The moment you take the middle path, the moment you have this inner faculty that enables you, when the call comes, to disregard John Jones and all his ails and ills, and say, wait a minute, what am I doing? What is my mission? There's only one Son of God, and that's Christ. I have nothing to do with the infinite forms and varieties in which it appears. There's but one Son of God, Christ, and it was never born, and it will never die. It was immaculately conceived, if you want it that way. As a matter of fact, it was God unfolding, disclosing, and revealing itself in infinite form and variety without any human accompaniment, without any human mode and means, and always perfect spiritual harmonious. I had the case of a young woman having her first child. She was a Christian Scientist and was admitted to the Christian Science maternity hospital outside of Los Angeles. And the doctor knew me personally, knew my work, and admitted her, even though I wasn't an authorized practitioner at that time. I was in the infinite way. And when it came to the delivery, they found that it was a breach. The child was turned wrong into, and they did all the things that Materia Medica does to turn the child around, but they couldn't make it turn. And finally, when they had used all the physical force they could, and the mother's pulse was beginning to drop, the doctor said to the nurse, you'd better run outside and phone Joel. Now, when that phone call came, and it is clear in my mind this instant as it was then, there was only one vision that I could behold. That was not a mother having a baby, because there wasn't anything I could do about it. It was the fact of spiritual identity. Christ is the only being, and it was never conceived, and it was never born, and it will never die. There's only one being, and that's Christ. I'm in this middle here, where I don't have a mother giving birth and a mother having a perfect birth. I'm in the middle here, where there are no human mothers, where there aren't even spiritual mothers, where only Christ is in its full-blown identity. And with that vision, when the nurse went back, the baby turned itself around and brought itself forth. Not only the doctor phoned me and the head nurse of the hospital, but the nurse in the delivery room phoned me, but never had they seen an experience of that kind. They called it a perfect Christian Science delivery. Now, as a matter of fact, if we look at it from the standpoint of a bad or probably fatal delivery turned into a good one, we miss the point entirely. There can be no human intervention, not even mentally. Not even mentally. It wasn't even the recognition or declaration that it's a Christ that does the work. It is some inner faculty that enables us to know that we are not mortals going through an experience from birth to death. Now, for our purpose in healing work, please remember this, that the moment your thought goes to your patient in any human connection, the moment you start to give a patient human advice, whether they should change climates, or whether they should sleep with the windows open or closed, or whether they should change their food, from that moment on, you are out of the middle path. You are really out of spiritual healing and back into mental healing or dietetic healing or physical healing and not recognizing it. We have nothing to do with an individual's diet. They will be divinely led to eat the right things and drink the right things. They will even be divinely led if their food is of such poor quality that it isn't properly feeding. They will even be led to take some vitamins to help it out. There'll be nothing wrong about that, because it will only be food in another form. They will be divinely led to what is right. Now, you, however, will have no part in that except your recognition of the middle path. You will hold only to one way. Christ is true being. You will have patients say, shall I give up smoking? Shall I give up drinking? What do I care? I don't care what you do. I'm not interested in your being a better human being. Not a bit. I don't care if you smoke or drink. I don't care if you jump off a roof. All I'm interested in is this thing in here that recognizes the Christ of your being. And my constant recognition of that Christhood results in this Christ revealing itself, manifesting and expressing itself. But remember, again, the statement of truth won't make it so. You must come to a place in the middle path. It's almost a place of indifference to humanhood. Almost a place of indifference to humanhood. It is a place of recognition of Christhood. It is true, you lose all desire to heal. You lose all desire to reform, but a wonderful thing happens too. You lose all criticism of people who are not living up to your human standards of what is right and wrong. You can no longer differentiate between saint and sinner. You can no longer differentiate between the good human and the bad human, because into your vision there comes the realization of true identity, and they will waken to that. Some instantaneously, some quickly, some slowly, and some interminably slowly. Because in some cases it involves a transition within them from the material sense of existence to the spiritual. It entails the dropping away of human characteristics, human faults, human failings, until they themselves enter this spiritual realm of existence. So you see, during this week, do not let us get away from this middle path. Remember that it may be for a while a matter of training. A matter of training yourself to an utter indifference of the human picture while you stand on spiritual integrity, while you stand on the Christhood of the individual. That doesn't mean that as the temptation comes to you to believe that you have some sickness to overcome, that you will not also be consciously rising, wait a minute, I'm not using God as a power to do something here. I'm not turning to God for a miracle. I am standing fast in the realization of, in spiritual living, we need no miracles. In spiritual living, harmony already is. And that brings you back to that word, is. It isn't such a difficult thing to be on the middle path if you have the help of the word is. Because always, if you are tempted to do something to improve the scene, you can come back, no, wait a minute, it already is. Already is. Is the only truth. Is. Hold to that is. Then you lose the temptation to try to make it become so. Do you see that? Now, in the mental science days, it was taught that being is becoming. Being can't be becoming. Being is. Is. It may be coming to our awareness. Just as the child, the youngster, each day learns something about this world, and to its sense is as if it were becoming so. To our sense, no, it's always been that way. That child is merely becoming aware of that which is. So we spiritually may be learning new truths each day, or thinking we are, but actually we aren't. We're becoming aware of that which is. So, healing work really is constituted of the recognition of the Christhood of individual being which already is. Now, you certainly don't need any God to make it so. You don't need any God power to make it so. All you need is your own vision to behold Christhood. Never attempt to make it so. Never attempt to bring it about, either by healing or reforming. Never. Stand fast in the middle path of the realization of Christhood, and let the good human and the bad human be what they are at any given moment. Let the sick human and the well human be whatever they are at any given moment. Don't feel elated about 99 and 2/5 temperature, because it can change down or up in a second. We have no temperature. We have only Christhood. Don't be elated about the lump going down, and don't be alarmed about the lump going up. You have nothing to do with lumps. You have to do with Christhood. Your vision is not the changing of physical conditions. Your vision is a vision of eternal, infinite Christhood. I am with you. Before Abraham, I am with you. I am with you unto the end of the world. This Christhood is a permanent identity. It is not one that someone can heal us of or make us into. Not even Jesus Christ coming to earth could make Christhood. Christhood was the established being. He revealed it to the ignorant thought, just as Mrs. Eddy revealed it and Mrs. Unity revealed it, and we are revealing Christhood. The only thing is that at this particular stage, our work is going a step beyond those in the fact that we are not concerned with mental causes for physical disease. We're not even concerned with moral causes for physical disease. We are not interested in changing humanhood. We have now come to the point of the Master's revelation where he says, my kingdom is not of this world. Who made me a judge over you? Who made me a divider? No. I am not going to get up an army and free you either from Rome or from the Hebrew church. You stay in that slavery as long as you're humans. Maybe it'll wake you up and bring you to the realization of your Christhood. Then you'll not be in bondage to any man or any government or any physical condition or mental or moral condition or financial or economic condition. You will not be freed from error. You will be freed in Christ. Once you are freed in Christ, you're not freed from it. That's why you can't free anyone. You can't free anyone from a bad marriage, and you can't free anyone from a bad job, and you can't free anyone from a bad business, and you'll never free anyone from a concentration camp. You can reveal their spiritual freedom in Christ, and that will break all material, mental, moral, economic fetters. Is that clear? Fine. We must see clearly that the most important part of all our work is the meditation. Our entire existence can be built around meditation and the two great commandments of the Master. These become our entire existence after a while. And the reason is this. What we learn is not learned so much through the mind as through the soul. In other words, definitely there are such things as spiritual faculties, just as we have the human faculties, the five physical senses. So there are spiritual faculties, soul faculties, they're called in the book The Infinite Way. It is an inner consciousness, an inner awareness that discerns that which cannot be humanly known. As for instance in that novel, those who saw that light around the glass or chalice, whatever it was, were seeing that which is invisible. In the same way, those who saw the risen Christ was seeing that which is invisible. There was no physical, visible Jesus walking on earth, or everyone would have seen him. But there was the risen Christ. There was that which was raised from the tomb, but which only those of spiritual vision could discern. In the same way as the Master asks, "Who do men say that I am?" Well, a resurrected Hebrew prophet. It's what they say. It's what they believe. "Who do ye say that I am?" Ah, Peter knows. "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." Yes, but he answers, "Flesh and blood hath not taught you this, hath not told you this." In other words, you haven't known that through seeing me, or hearing me, or feeling, or smelling, or tasting me. But you have known this through the Father within you. In other words, through your spiritual awareness, through your Christ consciousness, through your God consciousness. Through that, you have discerned that there is more to me than flesh and blood. You have penetrated through to the truth that the Christ is my being. The Christ is that which is pouring forth this message and performing this mission. You have seen that just as I, Jesus, can of my own self do nothing, that there is a divine presence and power within me capable of doing all things. Well, it took great spiritual discernment for Peter to see that, because how few of his day penetrated that outer vision and saw the Master as he is. In the same way that only about 500 witnessed Jesus after the resurrection. Why? Out of all the multitudes of those he healed and fed and taught, only about 500 bear witness to a resurrection. Only they had the spiritual vision to discern the man who is never born and the man who will never die. Now, all those who heal spiritually are of that same consciousness. Do you not see that as human beings we would sit here and look at the person with the fever or consumption or paralysis, and we would see what everybody else sees. And we would say, well, there's nothing you can do about this except whatever the medical books say. But then as spiritual practitioners you sit there and say, no. You deny the evidence of the senses, and whatever way you do it, you finally arrive at the conviction that Christ is man's only being. Christ is our only true identity. You rest in that, and then afterwards see it fulfilled. Now, how can you sit and look at grip and flu and pneumonia and all the rest of these things without fear when the other person is busily rushing around taking protective serums and one thing and another about it? Only because of a developed inner consciousness that has already risen to that degree above the evidence of the senses. Now, so it is. As we study, as we read, we are studying and reading things that are antagonistic to the human mind and which the human mind has no way of knowing or recognizing. So how then are you going to know them unless you also have that developed, or in the case of some few, natural, inner, intuitional faculty? The development of that faculty comes not only through study, but more even than through study, through meditation. There are many people who've been studying writings, metaphysical writings, for 10, 20, 30 years, and haven't even glimpsed one tiny glimpse of spiritual vision. they're reading with a mind, and they never get beyond that point of reading with their mind. At no point does some intuitional thing come in and reveal that which is written between the lines. Take the statement, "My kingdom is not of this world," or "My peace I give unto you." Now, people read that over and over and over again, "My peace I give unto you," and probably they are thinking about the man Jesus who spoke it. And they say, well, what good is it? He isn't here to give us that peace, and that ends it. And yet we come along and we say, oh, my peace. I understand that doesn't mean this human sense of peace. That is something that transcends it. You have caught with your inner vision the meaning that even the minister in the church, more often than not, fails to perceive, that there is such a thing as a my peace, a peace that has nothing to do with anything that is understood by peace on the human plane. In the same way as it is read, it is written, not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. And to the average reader reading with his mind, there is about as meaningless a statement as one could find. What do you mean, not by might and not by power, when all that human existence knows is might and power, either physical or mental? And then you say, well, now, wait a minute. I cannot use physical might in this matter, or even legal might, and I cannot use mental powers. What am I to do? Then something within says, but by my Spirit, is it my Spirit, Spirit of God? And then you're able to get quiet and let this my Spirit take over. And then you have the experience of David and Goliath. And David says, but I come to you in the name of God, without armor on. No, he could not fit that physical armor on him. It just wouldn't fit his state of consciousness at all. And so he says, I go out without armor, but I come in the name of the Lord. And in the name of the Lord, he stands there just ready to be cut down. And it doesn't happen. There again, you say, we stand in the presence of sin, disease, lack, limitation, fear, infection, contagion, and we do not surround ourselves by might, nor by power, but just with a silence. And we really and truly have faith in that silence. Not just a blind faith. We have an awareness that if we attain a deep enough silence, the entire visible picture will change, and it does. Now, that has all come to you through this inner vision, through this inner ability to discern that which humankind never will. The things of God are foolishness with men. The mortal man cannot know them, Paul tells us. Cannot know the things of God at all. And if ever there is a statement of Paul's that is true, it is that very one, that the natural man perceiveth not the things of God. And you might as well make up your mind to that no matter how much truth you ever know through books, no matter how much truth you ever learn through teachers, you are never going to perceive the things of God unless, in a degree, you do develop this soul consciousness, reveal, unfold, bring forth this inner vision that can see that which is invisible, hear that which is inaudible, and know that which is unknowable. Now, the reading helps that, the hearing helps that, everything we do in the way of lecture work, class work, all it helps. But all these things are merely helps to the main factor, which is the meditation. The meditation must accompany all of our reading and hearing. And that's why I say meditation becomes a mental practice if it's prolonged. It would be far better to sit in meditation for 2 or 3 or 4 minutes and then get up and go about our business than to sit for 2 or 3 hours. It is not possible at this period of our development, I'm speaking now as a general rule, to sit for more than a few moments without the mental faculties coming into play again, thought coming in. And that we must avoid. It would be far better to have 10 periods a day of 2 minutes each than to have one period of 10 hours. There comes a time when we can sit There are times when we can sit sometimes a whole hour or two and be so lost in the spirit that it seems to us like 2 or 3 minutes. It's only by looking at the clock that you find out that an hour or 2 or 3 has passed. But those experiences are not such that you can say, I can do that at will. It is not possible to do that at will. It is only possible to do that by grace. You can force yourself. Many Orientals force themselves to sit hours and hours and hours in meditation, which isn't a communion with the Spirit. If it were a communion with the Spirit, they come out of it so full of the Spirit that their lives would show forth tremendous things. Instead of, in most cases, they show forth very ugly things. But there are those who, through the practice, ultimately do come to where they could sit for 10 years in meditation and really be in communion with the Spirit. But that is an unusual soul. That is a highly developed spiritual consciousness. Ordinarily, at our stage, if we can maintain for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 minutes a meditation without a mental activity, that is good. Then, as we progress further, we can maintain it for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Rarely does it go beyond that, except in those moments of grace when the Spirit takes over, and it may keep you there for all day or all night. But when you come out of it, it will seem as if you had been there only a few moments or a few minutes. However, the point is that in developing this, try it only for periods of 2, 3, or 4 minutes, and or 5 at the most, and more frequent periods, until you can tell yourself when it is becoming a task, a labor, or when the mental is starting to take over again. And then stop it. Meditation does not necessarily mean getting messages or seeing lights or scenes. The meditation itself is an acknowledgement that I can of my own self do nothing, and I'm sitting here now waiting for something greater than I to reveal itself. So the very act of doing this, even for 1 second, would be an act of meditation that would bear ultimately very rich fruit. It would be like lifting the telephone receiver and waiting for a message. Sooner or later someone will come on and you'll receive the message. Now, just by closing your eyes for a second and opening that inner ear, you have opened the way to this inner awareness. And then you may have no message that time. You may have no reaction, no feeling. But you have opened the way, and it may be while you're driving your car or eating your meal or taking your bath or sleeping that the message will come through, but you will be instantly aware of it. If you're asleep, it will awaken you. You have opened yourself to it. That's all that you need do. You need not wait for it to come unless there is some specific reason why you must have that answer at this very second. But ordinarily, that is not true. And what we are doing is developing a line through to the soul at the center of us. Now, after weeks, months of this type of meditation, the line is continuously open. And from then on, you are in some measure in a constant state, a continuous state of meditation. In fact, you rarely leave it. Even in sleep, the line is wide open. You can be awakened. Anything you may be doing at any moment will not interfere with it. The line is open. You have made the contact. It is somewhat like being here in the center, in a groove, in a rhythm, separate and apart from the world, and that is a more or less continuous state, as if you were living right out here in a rhythm. Out here is the rest of the world, but you're right here in the center of it, and supported by that rhythm. I catch the Paul statement, I live, yet not I, Christ liveth my life. It's almost as if I weren't living it, it were living it, and I were going along. In one of our classes, it was brought to our attention, this quotation of Saroyan, that man does not live his own life. God lives man's life. Man just goes along for the ride. And that is the feeling you get, that you are just going along and that it is living your life. It functions for you. You sit to answer mail, and it comes along with the right answers for it. You are to give a treatment, and it comes along and gives you the right treatment. You are to make a decision, but you never do make it. It makes the decision for you, and you just accept the decision. Very much like the disciples. Judas had committed suicide, and the 11 are left, and they had to choose a 12th, and then they pray, Father, show us whom thou hast chosen. And then they just go along and cast their votes for the one that God has chosen. How do they know? It's put right into their mind, that's all. It's the one name that comes to all of them unanimously. And so it is. We do not break our heads who to vote for. We learned that back in our church organization days when we were electing readers or board members, and wanting to be scientific or spiritual about it, instead of humanly deciding who we would like to see in the desk or on the board, we would sit in quietness, and pretty soon the name would come. And if we really were in tune, that's who was elected. If we weren't in tune, it was just an evidence that personal sins had gotten in, either with us or with the membership. Now, for us then, the most important point is the development of our meditation, because that is the development of our inner faculties. And it is with our inner faculties that we discern truth right where appearances seem to be. The next part of our experience, and that on which we build our experience, are the two great commandments. The two commandments given us by the Master, both of which, of course, were taken from Hebrew Scripture. One from the book of Exodus and the other from the book of Leviticus. The reason for the importance, or rather the importance of knowing this, is that we should all be very familiar with the fact that truth is universal. Just as we should all know that do unto others as you would have others do unto you goes back 3,500 years before the Master. We should all know that, because we should come to the realization that all real truth, all spiritual truth, is not Hebrew, is not Jewish, is not Christian, but is universal. And even before Abraham was, all true, real, universal truth was. And that will break down for us our belief in personal messages or personal teachings, and convince us of the need to know all that is universal and accept all those who have been messengers as that which they really were, messengers of the Word, bearers of the Word. In his lectures on the present world conditions, Mr. Toynbee tells us that there is a way to stop this destruction of civilization, and And that way is if a new religion could be brought into the world, that would be the same for the Jew and the Greek, the bond and the free. In other words, if a religion could be conceived so universal that no one would say my religion or bar somebody from it, have a universal God, the moment we would come into that realization, freedom would be. Well, of course, that is very evident to you by the fact that we here are at peace because we have one God, one religion. And gratefully, that God and that religion is not confined to a church or even to a teaching. We acknowledge that this principle is the universal one, governing all being. And of course, if all men could see that, they'd be as much at peace with each other as we are with each other here. Now, the first great commandment is the first Hebrew commandment, the first of the 10 commandments, not to acknowledge any other but the one God. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Now you know, we have seen God as the creative principle of the universe. Once you see God as the only creative principle of the universe, you have seen the most important point of all, that there can be no power, reality, or effect from anything except that which emanates from God. As a matter of fact, you can understand that there isn't anything in existence except that which emanates from God, if you have seen God as the only creative principle. How impossible would it be for God to be the only creator, and for God to be infinite, and for some evil to be in existence? That was where you come to the experience of David. If we come in the name of the Lord, if we come in the recognition of no other power than God's power, we need not use might nor power for any purpose. The Spirit of the Lord is the only power there is, the only presence there is, the only all that there is. In the same way, if we acknowledge no other life but the life of God, you see that eventually we would understand that we have no life to age or to die. We would very quickly lose the personal sense of life and begin to see life as the universal life of all being. It is like watching a garden, and there you see 12, 15, 20 different species or varieties of flowers, plants, and yet if you were just to look a little below the ground, you'd find that there's only one life functioning down there. There's only one law, one power functioning down there, and it acts upon the lotus, the lily, the peaches, the pears, the plums, whatever it is that's planted there. Only one life, regardless of the infinite form and variety of its appearance. And so you'd say, then the life of one is the life of the other, and the life is indestructible. The life is always there. Now, there's a connecting link between that and our individual experience. Sometimes we believe that this that we behold in the mirror is our being. And we say, well, everything seems to age, everything seems to die and pass away, the flowers, the leaves. True, the tree remains, and next year you have new flowers or new leaves. Eventually you say, yes, but even the tree goes. There is the subject of false identity. We are not the tree, and we are not the flowers, and we are not the branches or the leaves. We are the life flowing through. It is as if you were to witness your fingernails being manicured, pared, and the remains of them being thrown in the fire, or your hair being cut and the cuttings being thrown in the fire. And you say, what difference does it make? I am not there. Well, ultimately, you must come to see that they could throw the whole body there, and you wouldn't be there. They could take the nails and the hair and the toes and the legs and the arms, and ultimately all of you, and throw it in the fire, but you would not be there, because you are the life of the body. You are not the body. Now, it is the same when you witness a tree or a plant in dissolution. Please do not believe for a moment that you are witnessing a plant or tree in dissolution. You are witnessing the outer form disappear while the tree itself remains. The tree is the life. That which you see with your eye is but the concept of its form. What happens to it has nothing to do with tree itself. Now, you watch this in your own being as your fingernails and toenails are removed and your hair is cut away. Watch also then and notice how your skin keeps sloughing off. Always you are having new skin. The skin is always sloughing. Matter of fact, medical science tells us that every year, every cell and every drop of blood in the body is renewed. Everyone is renewed. Everyone has a complete new body every year. But we are still there. So you are going to find that ultimately you are still here, even if they shovel your body into a fire. You'll probably be standing there watching it with as much amusement as you would if they were throwing the hair cuttings or nail cuttings onto the fire, with as much indifference too. Because you are eternal. And the reason you are eternal is God is your life. God is your individual identity, and it never dies. You never die. You never even pass on. You are always here witnessing these changes of body, which really aren't changes of body so much as they are changes of concepts of body. The body itself you have never seen, unless in a deep meditation you may have seen spiritual creation. Sometimes when we are in the depths of meditation, completely absent from this sense of body, there is the vision of reality. And that encompasses the reality of heaven and of earth. And then you begin to see that which is the reality of your being and the reality of your body. And then you can understand why not only being is immortal, body is immortal. The only thing changes is our concept of body. That continuously changes until all concepts have been given up through our working with the idea of is. Someday you will work a long enough period with the idea of is. That means putting no labels on anything. In other words, for instance, saying body. Just take the word body and acknowledge that you do not know what body is. There's only one thing you really know about body, and that is that body is. You're aware of it, so you know that it is. But anything beyond that at this present moment is a concept. It may be your concept of body, or it may be a concept that you've accepted from universal belief. It may be a concept that has been handed down to you through racial or religious or national belief, and so you entertain this concept of body. But you know nothing about body at this minute. And so you can acknowledge, yes, body is. What is body? And that sets up the question, which is the vacuum, the state of receptivity. From there on, that within you, the spiritual sense, must define to you what body is.